Hey everyone, this is Precog from the Headphone Show. Today, by popular request, I have a review of Sony's IER-Z1R. If you're not familiar with this IEM, it is Sony's flagship hybrid IEM that clocks in at $1,700. It sports a dynamic driver for the bass, a balance armature for the mid-range, and in a bit of a strange twist, it also has a dynamic driver for the tweeter. Now, this actually is not my first time hearing the Z1R. I heard it roughly a year ago, and in the short time that I had my hands on it, it shot straight to the top of my personal tier list, and it's been there ever since. But that was a year ago, and since then I've had the opportunity to hear dozens upon dozens of some very good IEMs. So I've been wondering for some time now, what would I think of the Z1R in today's context? This unit was provided for review by Alan of Headphones.com, and as usual what follows are my honest thoughts and opinions to the best of my own ability. Let's take a look. Normally I don't care too much about the presentation and accessories, but I do think Sony has outdone themselves here, and credit where credit is due. So starting with ear tips, oh my gosh, you get so many of them. You have their triple comfort ear tips on top. Those are more of a foam-based ear tip, I believe. And then on the bottom you have a wide selection of their hybrid silicone rubber ear tips. So you get 6 pairs of those on top and then 7 pairs of the hybrid silicones on bottom. And then you also get 2 MMCX cables, one for 4.4mm and then another that I have in 3.5mm on the Z1R. So that pretty much covers the most common terminations, which is awesome to see. The cable itself, the sheath is the same one that the Sony IER-M9 uses, I believe, and that is a stage monitor, so you can rest assured that these are going to hold up very well in practice, and they are pretty much non-microphonic. Over here is the case. It's a pretty nice case. I don't think anybody's going to be using this jewelry insert once they get their Z1R. And then you have a sort of bib in here for your IEMs. I don't think I've ever seen anybody use this. So speaking of practice, this is probably not the most useful accessory, but sweet to have it nonetheless. And then over here you can see that they include a clip that has never been used either. Moving on to the Z1R itself, you can see that this is a larger IEM. In fact, I want to say it's one of the largest IEMs that I've worn, and one of 2 IEMs, the other being the High Edition Viento B, that I find uncomfortable. I'll throw up a video on top that shows me wearing these, and trust me, it is not pretty. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that a large demographic of listeners will not be able to achieve a deep fit with these IEMs, much less wear them comfortably. A deep fit with these IEMs is important, as measurements have shown that an inadequate seal actually exacerbates the 6 kHz treble peak, so they'll sound overly bright in general. The build of the Z1R uses zirconium, which is a premium metal, and the Z1R is quite heavy as a result. Like most of the Sony stuff, there is a sense of robustness and reliability where you just know your IEM is going to work. You can see that the faceplate of the Z1R also sports a pearl edge finish, and this is a finish that is often used in high-end watches. Overall, the build quality here is great, even if these were not designed for human ears in my opinion. Let's talk about the actual sound. As usual, I will throw up a frequency response graph that you can take a look at your own leisure. It was taken off the IEC-711 coupler. There is a resonance peak at around 8 to 10 kHz, and measurements after that point should not be considered entirely accurate. So the Z1R follows something of a mild V-shaped tuning. It most closely emphasizes the sub-bass and the upper mid-range regions. While I generally refrain from giving genre-specific recommendations, I will say that this type of tuning tends to play best with stuff like K-pop and J-pop. And if you enjoy the Sony house sound in general, then you're probably going to vibe with the Z1R pretty closely. Let's take a look at the bass, and I want to kind of direct your attention away from the frequency response graph. It's largely sub-bass oriented, it curves off at 200 Hz, it's nice and controlled, we've heard it all before. Where the Z1R really makes its mark is in the intangibles. When it comes to sheer slam, texture, and decay, the Z1R is up there with some of the best. In fact, I would say it is the best bass response that I've heard in an IEM hands down. What is particularly noticeable about it though is the density of its transients. It is a very meaty bass response, and there's just nothing quite like it that I've heard in IEMs. At the same time though, it's also very good at scaling quicker tracks. Even though the decay is skewed to the slower side of things, it's absolutely unrelenting in the way it attacks and scales macro details. I will say to a certain extent there is a sort of macrodynamic compression going on here as a result, but by and large this is my benchmark for bass and IEMs. It's really just that good. Moving into the mid-range, this is where things get a little bit more contentious. You essentially have scooped lower mids contrasted to a more elevated upper mid-range, but there is something of a dip from 2 to 3 kHz. These sorts of recessions to frequency response can often impart a sense of spaciousness, but they do come with some tonal quirks, and they are pretty evident in the Z1R in retrospect. The mid-range just does not sound as good as I remember it being. Female vocals in particular, they have a certain hollowness to them, and at the same time, they sort of border on edginess in terms of the way the transients are articulated. Male vocals, I have said this before, and I basically stand by what I said previously, and it's that they're not bad by any means, but they're just a bit unremarkable. Treble though, I don't think I gave the treble of the Z1R enough credit last time when I reviewed it. The Z1R's treble sets a precedent that is rivaled only by its bass response. It's really that good. You have a sort of emphasis at around 6K hertz, 5 to 6K hertz. There's a little bit of a bump there, which skews the initial leading impact of a lot of percussive hits. But at the same time, the crash and the extension regions are extremely smooth. The transient attack and decay of the treble are just astounding. Transient attack in particular is uber crisp because of that 5 to 6K hertz bump, and there's just a certain hardness to it that you don't hear with a lot of other IEMs. Decay on the treble is beautiful as well, and it imparts a sense of spaciousness, and it sort of lends to the Z1R's extremely wide stage. So along these lines, let's talk about technical performance. The one thing that stands out time and time again about the Z1R is its imaging chops. When you hear a lot of IEMs, or at least when I hear a lot of IEMs, there is a tendency for the soundstage to be compressed vertically. By contrast, the Z1R is unabashedly tall and wide in its presentation. While it might seem like a bit of an exaggeration, it almost feels like you're in a cathedral of sorts. Like you're not actually in a cathedral, but the presentation and the way the stage is shaped feels like that. And to this end, there is a sort of realism to the Z1R's presentation that I haven't heard even on many IEMs that I would consider to be holographic. Stuff like the Solaris 2020, the Android 2020, the Tia Forte, and the Tia Trio, they're all IEMs that I would consider to be holographic, but at the same time, they all have some sort of imaging quirks that sort of detracts from the experience for me. There's something about the Z1R's imaging in tandem with the very natural bass decay and the treble decay that just keeps me in the track and keeps me engaged and makes it feel like I am actually there. Now, in terms of more traditional technicalities like detail retrieval, I would say the Z1R is pretty good, but it's also not best in class. Against stuff like the U12T, the Vision Ears Koenig, and the Empire Ears Odin, it's on the losing end of the stick. The reason why I can get away with this to a large extent though is because of its tuning. When you have a more scooped lower mid-range contrasted to a more elevated upper mid-range, that has a tendency to sort of emphasize resolution and clarity at the expense of note thinness. And to top that off, you also have the Z1R's peak at around 6K hertz, which is going to lend to the perception of detail. So yeah, it can definitely play with a lot of the big ballers, even if it doesn't quite have the innate detail that those IEMs do. Okay, and I'm sure some people will want a comparison to the 64 Audio U12T. I've repeatedly said in the past that this is my favorite IEM. I really do think that the U12T is one of the most balanced IEMs on the market today. With that being said, you do have to understand that the U12T and the Z1R, they are very different in their sonic presentation. Whereas the U12T leans more referencey and laid back, the Z1R is more V-shaped, warm, colored, and more exciting in general. The bass on the U12T is the best balanced armature bass there is, but at the end of the day, it's not going to hold a candle to the Z1R's dynamic driver. That's just sort of the discrepancy between a balanced armature and a dynamic driver. The mid-range of the U12T is a whole lot more balanced. It chooses to dip it, whereas the Z1R leans in the opposite direction. Treble on the U12T most closely favors the upper harmonics, so think 15K hertz. It has a Tia treble peak for air, whereas the Z1R most closely favors the lower treble with a minor bump at 6K hertz, like I mentioned earlier. Intangibly, these are also very different IEMs. The U12T does not have the Z1R's cathedral-like staging, and it's more vertically compressed like I was talking about earlier. Where it specializes most then is in positional cues and in center image distinction. When it comes to transient attack, the U12T has something of a softness to its transient attack, whereas the Z1R leans more hard and more resolving in that respect. When it comes to dynamic range, the U12T has one of the best dynamic ranges that I've heard. It is very good at scaling dynamic swings, and I would honestly say that the Z1R comes off a little bit compressed by comparison. At the end of the day, these are both top tier IEMs, and it's really just going to come down to personal preference, and probably ear anatomy, and which one you can fit. Okay, let's do a little wrap up where I will give my concluding thoughts on the Z1R. As I've made abundantly clear, the Z1R is not a perfect IEM, and no IEM is, but within the context of hybrid IEMs, and hybrid IEMs that I've heard at least, the Z1R is unmistakably a top tier IEM. In fact, I want to say it is the best hybrid IEM that I've heard. It would probably be the hybrid IEM that I would personally purchase if I could fit them in my ears for more than an hour at a time comfortably. And along these lines, I do have to express some reservations about the Z1R. The mid-range tuning is not the most balanced, and again, the fit is very contentious. I would absolutely recommend trying to demo these first before you decide to pull the trigger on them. But if you enjoy top-tier bass, top-tier treble, and top-tier imaging, then this could definitely be the IEM for you. As always, I hope you guys found this video review informative, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.